everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Tamiya TA08 Pro online build. After installing the lower suspension parts in part 1, we're now installing the upper suspension as well as assembling both the front and rear differentials. We'll also be dropping the drivetrain in place, diffs, motor mount with the spur gear assembly, and both drive belts. Alrighty, let's get to it. The rear body mounts are directional, so make sure you have them in the correct orientation. Installing the circular belt guide is a little confusing at first. It doesn't mount to the gear, but instead slides onto it. We'll make more sense of this and how it works in a few more steps. Because I have a ton of 64 pitch gears and not many Tamiya pitch gears, I decided to swap out the stock spur gear with a 96 tooth 64 pitch version. If you decide to swap out the spur gear with another brand or pitch, you may or may not need the 0.5mm shim that installs in the center shaft. I didn't, so I left it out of the build. Note that in this step, the center shaft keys to the motor mount. When assembling, make sure you separate the belt guides and install the drive belts between them. It's an odd design, but it does work. To make installation easier, install the center mount with only the rear belt attached first. Just snug this screw down, allowing you to rotate the motor mount enough to install the front belt. After opening and removing all the parts, make sure all the flashing and burrs are removed. Apply a liberal amount of grease to the blue O-rings prior to installation. I always add a small dab of black grease to the back of the gears to help keep them in place. However, I didn't follow my own rule here when assembling the diff gears. Absolute nightmare. I highly suggest using black grease here to keep all the parts together during this step. Be careful during this part of the build to make sure all of the shims and gears stay connected to the crosspiece. Unless of course you were smart and used the black grease, then I'm sure all is well. The 100,000 diff fluid is quite thick, so take your time and make sure you get it in all of the nooks and crannies. Other than the fluid weight, the rear diff builds exactly like the front. Let both differentials sit for a few minutes to allow the fluid to fully settle. It's a good idea to add a dab of black grease here to help keep the gasket in place. Align the two diff halves, fit together, and secure with the M 2x8mm screws. During this part of the assembly, test the diff to make sure everything inside is seating correctly. Repeat the process for the rear diff. Note that the 0.2mm shim is only used on the front diff. While I was preparing to install the diffs, I missed the assembly of the front anti-roll bar mounts. Go ahead and attach those before we move on to the next step. These rotating rings help loosen or tighten the drive belt. To make them easier to see when installed in the car, I colored the indent with a silver Sharpie. Note the direction of the diffs during installation. Aligning the notches left to right can be a bit of a challenge, but you'll get it figured out once you get hands-on. I sent the front diff to the straight up and down position, which is different from the manual. The rear diff is one notch forward, just like the manual. The caps have recesses underneath that snap to screw bosses in the top of the lower bulkheads. Make sure those are all aligned prior to screwing the caps down. Rotate the drivetrain to make sure everything rotates smoothly. It's also a good look at our 64-pitch spur gear we installed as well. The manual suggests a light dab of grease to help install the turnbuckle shafts. It's a good idea to follow that suggestion. When assembling the links, make sure you align the upper arm and ball cup with the lines etched into them. A good force of habit is to use one of your assembly tools to rotate the pivot balls to make sure they seat correctly. Follow the same steps to assemble the next set of upper arms. And that concludes part 2 of our Tamiya TA08 Pro online build. In the next video, we'll be assembling the steering as well as the rest of the drivetrain and suspension. If this video helped you out, why not give it a like? And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notifier to be alerted to future videos in this series. Thanks for watching!